Welcome to Character Explorations, a podcast production of the Wendt Center for Character Education at the University of Dubuque. I'm Annalee Ward, the director of the Wendt Center, and our guest today is Mary Bryant, Director of Media and Programming here in the Wendt Center. She is the author of the article, Gameplay and Human Flourishing. And you may enjoy reading the essay as well, and it is available online at dbq.edu/Wendt. That's dbq.edu/WENDT. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
Now, you wrote this article for the journal issue Character and Play, and I know you were excited about the topic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background that made you even happy about it?
Yes, well, I just love to play in many ways. I love music and theater. I have a lot of hobbies. I like to try new things. I love to play with language even, as a German translator. And I love to play games.
All right, I can understand that this was a topic that you would be excited about. Well, what were you doing when we began this work together?
I wanted to learn Mandarin Chinese, and I had heard about Duolingo. That's an app that turns language learning into a game, and it has points and rewards and leagues where you're competing with other people, and streaks, day streaks, where you challenge yourself not to miss one day of language practice. And sometimes I worry that the time spent playing games in particular, is time wasted. And so finding something that was a game that would teach me a practical skill just seemed perfect for me. So I tried it out. And at first I liked it. It was this immediately accessible way to jump into this language learning. But that feeling of enjoyment didn't really last very long, at least not long enough to make much headway in learning the language.
You started to not like it?
Yes, the joy just faded. It was this rote, repetitive, meaningless thing that I was doing, but I felt compelled to keep going. And I wasn't really doing it for the language anymore. I was doing it to keep that streak up and to get that little happy ding when I got something right, and to be able to say, oh, I'm in the Diamond League, sure. I'm still competing with the best of the best. It wasn't at all about language anymore, and I hated it. It felt wrong. I wasn't actually learning anymore. I was hardly getting anywhere with it.
And by the way, did you have a long streak?
Oh yeah, I was beyond 400 days when I started to think, I just can't do this anymore.
More than a year. Okay. That gives us an idea of how involved and committed you were. Now, you raise a question about game playing and human flourishing in your article. What do you mean by flourishing?
Well, I think of flourishing as thriving and growing internally and externally. There are a lot of people thinking about flourishing. I mean, it goes back to Aristotle. Currently, my favorite synthesis of the idea of flourishing comes from Tyler J. Vanderweel. He suggests that human flourishing is overall well-being in regard to 6 domains. And that's happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, social relationships, and material and financial stability.
A lot of factors.
Yeah, and it's just, we can't all be perfectly thriving and growing in every area, but it's that pursuit of well-being in as many areas as we can. We're not in complete control of our health. We're not in complete control of, material and financial stability always. But it's that seeking to be as whole and well as we can. So where I'm going with this is I began to question whether gameplay was really good for us. Does it promote flourishing?
Okay. What an important question for us to think about here. Now, in this project, you had colleagues. We were all writing for this issue together, and they took a very wide lens approaching play. But you look at it in more the traditional sense of games. What are some of the benefits of gameplay? As you're exploring whether this is good or bad, let's find out first what are some of the benefits.
Sure. So when you're playing a game, a social game that has others involved, we're challenged to work with them and to develop our relationships and improve social skills and virtues and just become more community-minded and create bonds. Games can challenge us. Things don't always go really well, but we learn through those challenges how. It's like practicing skills for real life. You learn how to get through this conflict that you're having with someone in a safe, playful situation. Another way that games help us engage with the world is that some games, particularly role-playing games, can encourage players to think about other viewpoints and allow for experimenting with new perspectives.
The new perspectives, does that include playing the villain or the anti-hero?
It can. You can experiment with what an immoral decision might lead to.
And that's beneficial?
Sure, if you're trying to determine what is ethical, or your own process of figuring out the ethical or moral consequences.
We don't often think about ethical consequences in something like a gameplay because it's otherworldly. It's not my real life. So I appreciate hearing that it can stimulate our moral imagination, basically, in ways that teach us, in ways that help us grow as people and grow our character. So I can see where that is a benefit as long as we're being reflective about it.
Yes.
Are there any positive physical even or mental impacts of board games or role plays?
Games can be really good for our health and not just sports games. Studies have shown that adults who play board games are less likely to develop dementia. They're more likely to stave off cognitive decline. Board games even help us fight depression and heart disease. And
heart disease?
Yeah, heart disease. Because playing board games has been shown to reduce stress. And stress is a significant contributor to heart disease. So by lowering stress, we're working to improve our cardiovascular health. And laughter is often involved in gameplay. It's not always, but if you are laughing, then you can also benefit from laughter's many positive physiological and psychological effects. But I do want to say that people who consider leisure activities a waste of time, they tend not only to enjoy these activities a lot less, but they also miss out on many of the mental health benefits of leisure that others do get. And I should also mention that video game play could be linked to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, probably because of the long periods of time that they tend to spend sitting down. You need to be aware of how long you're sitting and playing your games, whether it's tabletop or video, and just be cognizant of what you're doing with your body as you sit and play.
Now, maybe we should mention here there are so many ways to think about games that you've drawn a border around the games you're addressing.
Yes. So I'm talking about board games, tabletop mostly, And I include role play as well, video games, and gamified apps. But I think imaginative play and sports absolutely apply to this. It was just too much to address everything.
Okay, I think that's important to take note of, because our listeners might be wondering, why aren't you talking about the power of sports? Well, we've done that in other episodes, and we've done that in other ways, but giving this focus helps us think particularly about these kinds of games, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is distracting ourselves with a game, I mean, let's face it, sometimes gameplay is just a distraction or a way to get out of boredom. Is that kind of distraction a positive or negative thing?
Oh, well, that depends on the circumstance and what it is you're being distracted from. Gameplay can provide relief from pain and hardship through distracting. So we get pleasure from playing, and that comes from these natural endogenous opioids, endorphins. And endorphins also lower stress and block pain receptors. Researchers have found that playing games can actually decrease the level of pain or anxiety or stress that the player is feeling. And so in many cases, using games to cope is good for you. It's when you're distracting yourself from necessary activities or relationships, or if parts of your life are suffering because of your gameplay, then it is a problem.
Well, and that leads to the question, should we be concerned about addiction? We've all heard video games can be addicting. Is that a real problem?
Yes. To simplify down, the mechanisms in our brain that allow us to feel pleasure and seek rewards and transition out of the pleasure and reward cycle should work together smoothly, but they can fall out of sync from one another. And the problem of addiction comes about when that reward-seeking behavior runs unchecked, even if we're not even feeling the pleasure anymore. And honestly, that was my concern with Duolingo. Digital game designers have kind of tapped into these, what scientists have learned about neurobiology, and they can take this direct aim at these mechanisms behind seeking pleasure. And that's a problem. Some of these elements of behavior addiction that video games and online apps use to keep our interest and attention are things like compelling goals that we just can't quite get to, positive feedback that's unpredictable but irresistible, a sense that we are gradually getting to our goal, increasing difficulty. This came from Adam Alter's Irresistible, his book on addictive technology and the digital video game business trying to get us hooked.
Well, maybe, okay, so we've seen a dark side to gameplay when it gets controlled by that addictive side of our brains. But the positive factors really are positive. I mean, you've talked about the power of social engagement, and just the mental and the physical impact of it. It sounds productive in that sense.
Yes, I absolutely don't want to dwell on the negatives here. It is positive.
Well, let's get back to the topic of gamification of learning. Can we really learn through games?
I think so. To get back to the neurochemical activity that I talked about, when we play, those neurotransmitters that get involved actually prime us for learning. It stimulates neural growth, promotes plasticity, and helps with learning and memory. So teachers have been using games
So teachers have been using games. We see its power in education, and it brings us back to really where you started the paper, asking the question, is gameplay productive? I am so curious about what happened with Duolingo. Are you still playing it? Has it been productive? Have you learned Mandarin?
So no, I quit playing Duolingo. It was I think 460 some days when I finally I quit cold turkey. I just didn't feel like I was getting anywhere with it, or not only was I not improving my Mandarin, I was not enjoying myself. I felt bad. And I decided to recommit to studying Mandarin. I got out some old college textbooks because I had started a little bit of Mandarin 20 years ago. And I signed up for an online program through the library, and I'm studying now in much more traditional lessons. And here's the surprise. I did make a habit of it. So I am continuing that learning. And Duolingo did get me started. It got me over the hump of where do I start? How do I get going? And so now it's fun work. I stopped playing this monotonous, boring play that I didn't like, and now I'm enjoying my work.
So you have found a way to even use the app for learning as a way of jump-starting your own learning.
Yeah, I developed some discipline. I do think I flourished in the end, even though I complained so much about it while I was playing, in quotes.
So I love hearing about games because I too like to play games, and I love knowing that the trend toward gamification, the centrality of gameplay, at least through video games and apps, might have some positive things to it and actually help us flourish, actually give us opportunities to grow and be formed as people who can practice character in a way that goes and tries, as people who can practice character even in an artificial environment of character, but take that and learn from it in the rest of their lives. Mary, thank you for the reminder that play doesn't have to be productive in the measurable fashion to be beneficial and even to help us flourish. Are there any last comments you want to share?
Yeah. Play doesn't have to produce a measurable outcome to be meaningful and helpful. We shouldn't feel ashamed of leisure activities that don't satisfy society's idea of productive, or else we risk missing out on the benefit that play offers. I hope we all, at some level, have the opportunity to pursue that well-being and that flourishing that we can achieve together through gameplay.
Good reminders. Thank you for thinking deeply about the topic of play and for being with us today. Our guest has been Mary Bryant, Director of Media and Programming in the Wendt Center for Character Education at the University of Dubuque. And I'm Annalee Ward for Character Explorations.